The fluorescent hospital lights burned my swollen eyes as I struggled to breathe through the ventilator mask. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and bruising that painted my torso in shades of purple and black. My parents huddled in the corner, whispering frantically about damage control and family reputation, while nurses monitored my vital signs. Everyone believed my sister Amanda's story about my terrible accident, how I had stumbled down our basement stairs while helping clean out our late grandmother's belongings. But accidents don't leave fingerprint bruises on your shoulders or the kind of rage-filled memories that replay behind closed eyelids. As Dr. Martinez approached my bedside with X-ray films in his hands and concern etched across his face, I knew our family's carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. The truth started 3 days before I ended up fighting for breath in this sterile room. I had driven to my childhood home in suburban Columbus to help sort through Grandma Eleanor's possessions 6 months after her peaceful passing in hospice care. Amanda and I were supposed to work together cataloging items for estate distribution, according to what we believed was Grandma's final will. The house felt hollow without her warm presence, filled only with cardboard boxes and the musty scent of old memories. I was carefully wrapping Grandma's crystal figurine collection when I noticed several empty jewelry boxes in her bedroom dresser. The pearl necklace she wore to every family gathering gone, her antique cameo brooch from Italy missing, the diamond tennis bracelet that had belonged to her mother nowhere to be found. My stomach dropped as I searched through every drawer and jewelry case, finding only vacant velvet compartments where precious heirlooms should have rested. When Amanda arrived an hour later, perfectly dressed as always with her blonde hair in a neat chignon and her bank manager suit pressed to perfection, I confronted her immediately. She was sorting through books in the living room, acting completely natural, while discarding volumes that had meant everything to our grandmother. "Where's Grandma's jewelry collection?" I asked directly, holding up an empty ring box that once held her emerald engagement ring. Amanda barely glanced up from the pile of classic novels she was stuffing into donation bags. "What jewelry? Grandma didn't have much valuable stuff. You know how she lived so simply toward the end." That was our first lie of many that day. I pulled out my phone and showed her the insurance appraisal from 2 years earlier, listing over $50,000 worth of antique and inherited jewelry pieces. Grandma had given me a copy for safekeeping, worried about theft during her illness. Amanda's composure cracked slightly. Maybe she sold some pieces to pay for medical expenses. Hospice care was expensive. But Medicare had covered most of Grandma's care, and her savings account showed no large withdrawals for medical bills. I had helped manage her finances during her final months, ensuring all her needs were met while preserving her assets for the inheritance she wanted to leave us. "Amanda, I need to know where these items went. They're part of the estate, and we're legally required to account for everything." That's when her mask finally slipped. The sweet sister act vanished, replaced by cold calculation and barely controlled anger. "You always were the suspicious one, Priscilla. Grandma probably gave those pieces away to friends or donated them years ago. Stop trying to create drama where none exists." I followed her down to the basement where we were supposed to catalog Grandma's stored Christmas decorations and photo albums. The concrete steps were steep and narrow, with no handrail leading down to the finished basement where we had played as children. Amanda walked ahead of me, her heels clicking against the wooden steps with sharp, angry precision. "I found receipts," I said quietly, pulling folded papers from my jacket pocket. "From Harrison's jewelry exchange downtown. 11 separate sales transactions over the past 4 months totaling $47,000. All signed with your name and Grandma's signature as the owner." Amanda spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance on the narrow step. Her face had gone completely white, then flushed deep red with rage I had never seen before. "You went through my personal papers. These were in Grandma's filing cabinet with her estate documents. You forged her signature to sell her jewelry and kept the money for yourself." What happened next changed everything between us forever. Amanda's hands shot out and grabbed my shoulders with surprising strength. her perfectly manicured nails digging through my sweater into my skin. "You don't understand anything," she hissed through clenched teeth. "I needed that money. I had debts to pay obligations you couldn't possibly comprehend with your simple little life." I tried to pull away from her grip, but she was stronger than I expected, fueled by desperation and fury. "Amanda, let go. We can figure this out together. If you're having financial problems, we can work something out with the estate." "Work it out?" She laughed bitterly, her grip tightening painfully on my shoulders. "There is no working it out. There's only keeping quiet and moving forward, which is what this family has always done." I felt her hands push against me with violent force, sending me backward into empty air. The basement steps rushed up to meet me as I tumbled helplessly, my head striking the concrete floor with a sickening crack that echoed through the empty house. Consciousness faded as blood pooled beneath my skull. The last thing I heard being Amanda's panicked voice calling 911 and rehearsing her story about my careless accident. When I woke up in the hospital 12 hours later, my parents were already there, having driven through the night from their retirement community in Florida. Amanda sat beside my bed with red-rimmed eyes, playing the devastated sister role perfectly for the medical staff. But I remembered everything: her rage-filled confession about the debts, her violent shove, the calculated way she'd grabbed my shoulders to throw me down those steps. And I realized with growing horror that my own family was prepared to let me nearly die to protect Amanda's reputation and whatever secrets she was hiding about her financial situation. The next morning brought a parade of family manipulation disguised as concern. Mom fussed over my blankets and adjusted my pillows while coaching me on the official version of events. "You remember how it happened, don't you, sweetheart? You were carrying too many boxes and missed your footing on those old basement steps. Thank goodness Amanda found you so quickly." She spoke in the overly bright tone she used when company was coming, the voice that meant appearances mattered more than truth. Her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the emergency, and she wore her best pearl earrings to the hospital, as if visiting hours were a social event requiring proper presentation. Dad paced the small room like a caged animal, checking his BlackBerry every few minutes for messages from his golf buddies and country club board meetings. Robert Whitmore had built his insurance agency reputation on being the family man who never had personal scandals or embarrassing incidents that might make clients question his judgment. A daughter with suspicious injuries and police involvement could damage everything he had worked to build. "The important thing is focusing on your recovery," he said without looking directly at me. "Dr. Martinez seems capable, though I've made some inquiries about transferring you to a private facility with better amenities and more discreet staff." Translation: somewhere the doctors would ask fewer questions and accept whatever story we told them. Amanda visited during afternoon hours when the nursing staff changed shifts, bringing flowers and magazines while maintaining her grieving sister performance. But when our parents stepped out for coffee, her entire demeanor shifted to something cold and threatening that made my healing ribs ache with remembered pain. "I hope you understand how serious this situation is," she whispered, leaning close to my bandaged head. "If you say anything different from what happened, I'll tell everyone you were drunk that day. I'll say you attacked me first and I was defending myself when you fell." Who do you think they'll believe? The successful bank manager who found her injured sister, or the unemployed woman with a history of clumsiness and depression? She was right about the depression. After losing my teaching job due to budget cuts and struggling to find new employment, I had been seeing a therapist and taking medication for anxiety and grief counseling following Grandma's death. Amanda could easily twist those facts into a narrative about instability and self-destructive behavior. "People will think you hurt yourself for attention like you used to do when we were kids." She continued, her voice syrupy sweet, in case anyone was listening. "Remember how you always had those mysterious bruises and broken bones? Everyone already believes you're accident-prone." That evening, while pretending to rest, I overheard my parents talking quietly in the hallway with Amanda. They thought the door was completely closed, but it hung slightly ajar, letting their conversation drift into my room, along with the antiseptic scent and beeping monitors. "The police haven't asked any follow-up questions," Dad was saying. "As long as everyone sticks to the same story, this whole thing will blow over without affecting Amanda's career prospects." "I'm more worried about medical bills," Mom replied. "Priscilla doesn't have adequate insurance coverage for this kind of extended care. We might need to consider early discharge to manage costs." "I can help with expenses," Amanda offered. "My position at First National pays well, and I have some savings set aside. Family takes care of family." "What savings?" I wondered silently. The money from Grandma's stolen jewelry. Was Amanda actually planning to use our grandmother's possessions to pay for my medical treatment after she was the one who put me here? But something else bothered me more than the financial discussion. During my fog of pain medication and concussion symptoms, I had been remembering fragments of conversations from Grandma's final weeks. She had tried to tell me something important about Amanda, something about papers and signatures and being careful who I trusted. At the time, I thought her comments reflected medication, induced confusion, or natural worry about death and legacy. Now I wondered if Grandma had discovered Amanda's theft and tried to warn me before she passed away. If so, the jewelry sales were just the beginning of whatever financial crimes Amanda had been committing. Over the next 2 days, I started paying closer attention to Amanda's visits and phone conversations. She spent a lot of time texting and stepping outside to take calls, claiming they were work-related emergencies that required her immediate attention. But twice I heard her mention legal documents and signature verification conversations that sounded more personal than professional. On the third morning, while Amanda thought I was sleeping, she opened her purse to find lip balm, and I glimpsed something that made my blood freeze. Folded papers with official letterhead and what looked like legal seals, along with a thick envelope marked Estate Documents, Eleanor Whitmore. Grandma's estate papers, which should have been secured with the family attorney, were sitting in Amanda's personal handbag. Whatever she was planning went far beyond stealing jewelry to pay gambling debts. She was preparing to manipulate Grandma's entire inheritance, and my inconvenient survival was threatening to expose her scheme. Dr. Martinez was in his mid-40s with kind eyes and gentle hands that had examined thousands of trauma patients during his 15-year career in emergency medicine. During morning rounds, he spent extra time checking my shoulder mobility and asking detailed questions about the mechanics of my fall that made my parents fidget uncomfortably. "The bruising pattern on your upper arms is quite distinctive," he said, photographing the purple fingerprint marks with his medical camera. "Can you walk me through exactly how you lost your balance on the stairs?" I started to repeat Amanda's rehearsed story, but Dr. Martinez held up his hand politely. "I'd like to hear it in your own words without anyone else's interpretation of what happened." Mom immediately jumped in with concern that felt rehearsed. "Doctor, she's still recovering from her head injury. Her memory might be fragmented or confused about the sequence of events." "That's exactly why I prefer to hear directly from the patient," he replied firmly. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you mind giving us a few minutes alone? I need to conduct a proper neurological assessment." After my parents reluctantly left, Dr. Martinez pulled a chair close to my bed and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Priscilla, I've been practicing emergency medicine for a long time. I've seen every kind of accident and injury you can imagine. The pattern of trauma on your body doesn't match the story I've been hearing about a simple fall." He pulled out a tablet and showed me photos of my X-rays and CT scans. "Your rib fractures occurred from impact against the stairs during your fall, which is consistent with tumbling down steps. But these shoulder blade bruises happened before you fell from someone gripping you with significant force. The physics don't work for an accidental stumble." My heart started racing, triggering the monitors attached to my chest. Here was a medical professional who believed what I remembered, who understood that accidents don't leave fingerprint-shaped evidence on your skin. "I also noticed some old injuries in your medical records," Dr. Martinez continued. "A broken wrist from 2 years ago treated at urgent care. A sprained ankle last spring also treated elsewhere. Bruised ribs from 6 months ago that you said happened during a hiking accident. Are you seeing a pattern here? I was quiet for a long time, processing the reality that my lifetime of accidents was finally being questioned by someone with the authority and knowledge to recognize abuse. All those times Amanda had hurt me as a child and teenager explained away by our parents as sibling roughhousing or my own clumsiness were actually documented evidence of ongoing violence. My sister has anger management issues, I whispered finally. She's always been the successful one, the golden child who could do no wrong. When she gets frustrated or feels threatened, she lashes out physically, but only when no one else is around to witness it. How long has this been going on? Since we were children. Amanda is 3 years older and has always been stronger, more confident, more everything. My parents made excuses for her behavior because she was such a high achiever in school and athletics. They said I was accident-prone and needed to be more careful around her. Dr. Martinez made notes on his tablet documenting everything I shared with the thorough precision of someone building a medical case. Have you ever reported these incidents to police or sought help from domestic violence resources? I tried to tell my parents when I was younger, but they always took Amanda's side. She would cry and say I was lying to get attention, that I had hurt myself and was trying to blame her. Eventually, I learned to stop complaining and just avoid situations where we might be alone together. But you couldn't avoid helping with your grandmother's estate. No, and I think Amanda knew I would discover her theft eventually. The jewelry sales were just the beginning of whatever she's been doing with Grandma's assets. I think she panicked when I confronted her with the receipts and reacted with violence to silence me. Nurse Patricia knocked softly and entered with my afternoon medications. She was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the competent manner of someone who had seen everything during her decades in healthcare. As she checked my IV line and vital signs, she glanced meaningfully at Dr. Martinez. "How are you feeling today, honey?" she asked me with genuine warmth. "Are your family visits helping with your emotional recovery?" The question seemed innocent enough, but I sensed deeper meaning behind it. Medical professionals were trained to recognize signs of domestic abuse and family dysfunction, and my situation was raising red flags throughout the hospital staff. "They're very concerned about my physical healing," I answered carefully. "Of course they are. And do you feel safe and supported by their presence here?" Before I could answer, Amanda appeared in the doorway with a bright smile and another bouquet of flowers. "How's our patient doing today? I brought some magazines and your favorite chocolate from that little shop downtown." Her timing felt calculated, as if she had been monitoring my conversations with medical staff and chose this moment to interrupt with her caring sister performance. Nurse Patricia nodded politely and finished her tasks, but I noticed the way she observed Amanda's behavior and body language with professional assessment. After Patricia left, Amanda settled into the visitor chair with forced casualness. "You look much better today. I bet you'll be ready to go home soon and put this whole ordeal behind us." Home. The word felt loaded with threat and implication. Would I be safe returning to my apartment, or would Amanda see me as an ongoing risk that needed to be managed permanently? The woman who had violently thrown me down basement steps and stolen from our dying grandmother was capable of anything if she felt cornered by exposure. "The doctor wants to run a few more tests," I said noncommittally. "Well, I'm sure he's being overly cautious. These liability issues make doctors order unnecessary procedures to protect themselves from lawsuits. Don't worry, I can work with the billing department to make sure insurance covers everything appropriately." Again, with the money concerns. Amanda seemed very interested in managing the financial aspects of my care, which made me wonder if she was planning to control information flow by handling payment and insurance claims herself. That evening, after visiting hours ended, Dr. Martinez returned with a social worker named Jennifer Chen, who specialized in domestic violence cases. Together, they presented me with options I had never considered possible: legal protection counseling, resources, and medical documentation that could support criminal charges if I chose to pursue them. For the first time in my adult life, someone was offering to help me fight back against Amanda's abuse instead of telling me to forgive her or try harder to get along with family. The next morning brought a flurry of medical consultation that had my parents pacing nervously in the hallway. Dr. Martinez had requested that Dr. Susan Chen, the hospital's chief radiologist, review all my imaging studies with fresh eyes and document her findings for the medical record. Dr. Chen was a petite woman with sharp intelligence and 30 years of experience reading trauma X-rays. She had seen enough assault victims to recognize the subtle differences between accidental injuries and intentional violence patterns that told stories the victims themselves might be afraid to share. "Your scans are quite revealing," she explained, pulling up my images on the large monitor in the consultation room. "Let's start with the obvious injuries from your fall down the stairs. The rib fractures here and here show impact patterns consistent with striking hard edges during a tumbling motion. The head trauma matches contact with a flat surface like concrete flooring." She zoomed in on different sections of the X-rays, highlighting areas of concern with her laser pointer. But these shoulder injuries tell a different story entirely. The bruising extends deep into the muscle tissue in a pattern that matches forceful gripping by human hands. Someone grabbed you with considerable strength and squeezed hard enough to damage blood vessels and soft tissue. Could that have happened when she tried to catch herself during the fall? Mom asked hopefully from her position near the door. No, Mrs. Whitmore. The angle and depth of these bruises occurred while she was standing upright and facing someone approximately 3 inches taller than herself. This was not self-inflicted or accidental contact. Dr. Martinez joined the conversation carrying a thicker file that made my stomach clench with apprehension. "We've also compiled Priscilla's medical history from various healthcare providers over the past 5 years. The pattern is quite concerning." He spread out copies of X-rays, urgent care records, and emergency room reports dating back to my college years. Suddenly, my lifetime of accidents was laid out in chronological order, creating a visual timeline of abuse that even I hadn't fully recognized. Broken wrist treated at Riverside Urgent Care 18 months ago. You reported tripping over a curb while walking with family members. Dr. Martinez pointed to the X-ray showing a clean break that required surgical pins. Sprained ankle treated at Columbus General Emergency Department 8 months ago. You said you fell while hiking with your sister. "I remember that one," Dad interjected. "Amanda was so upset about Priscilla's clumsiness. She blamed herself for choosing a difficult trail." Bruised ribs treated at your primary care physician's office 4 months ago. You reported falling off a ladder while cleaning gutters. Dr. Chen continued reading from the medical timeline. But the fracture pattern matches a direct blow to the rib cage, not the distributed impact you'd expect from a fall. With each medical record, they reviewed the evidence mounted into an undeniable pattern of repeated trauma disguised as accidents. I had been to 4 different medical facilities over 2 years, probably to avoid raising suspicions at any single location, but compiled together, my injuries painted a clear picture of ongoing physical abuse. Most telling are these older injuries that were never properly treated, Dr. Martinez said, pointing to faded shadows on my recent scans. Hairline fractures in your ankle that healed incorrectly, probably from childhood. Scar tissue in your shoulder joint suggesting repeated dislocations that weren't medically addressed. Dental records showing emergency repairs to broken teeth that occurred during your teenage years. She was always accident-prone, Mom said weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. Even she was starting to see the pattern that medical professionals recognized immediately. Mrs. Whitmore, in my 15 years of emergency medicine, I've learned to distinguish between patients who have occasional accidents and patients who are victims of systematic abuse. Your daughter's medical history shows clear evidence of repeated intentional trauma, most likely occurring in private settings with family members present. The room fell completely silent except for the humming of medical equipment and distant hospital corridor noises. My parents looked stricken, finally confronted with documentation they couldn't explain away or dismiss as coincidence. Dr. Chen pulled up one final image that made everyone freeze. This is yesterday's chest X-ray taken from a different angle than our initial films. Do you see this shadow pattern along the rib cage? These are older fractures, probably from 6 to 8 months ago, that weren't properly diagnosed or treated at the time. I remembered those ribs, the hiking accident with Amanda that left me breathless and aching for weeks, dismissed by my doctor as muscle strain after Amanda insisted I had simply fallen on rocky terrain. I had been in pain for over a month, but X-rays weren't ordered because the initial injury report seemed minor. Someone kicked or punched you in the ribs with enough force to cause hairline fractures, Dr. Martinez said quietly. The healing pattern shows you continued normal activities without proper medical care, probably because you were told the injury wasn't serious. That's impossible, Dad protested, but his face had gone completely pale. Amanda would never intentionally hurt her sister. You're misinterpreting these images based on assumptions rather than facts. I'm interpreting these images based on 30 years of experience with trauma victims, Dr. Chen replied firmly. Mr. Whitmore, your daughter has been systematically abused by someone with regular access to her, someone she trusts enough to be alone with, despite repeated injuries. The medical evidence doesn't lie even when patients are afraid to tell the truth about their circumstances. At that moment, Amanda appeared in the doorway with her usual perfect timing, as if she had been monitoring our conversation from the hallway. She carried coffee for everyone and wore an expression of loving concern that would have fooled me completely just a week ago. "How's our patient this morning?" she asked, brightly distributing cups with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing social situations. "I brought everyone's favorites from that coffee shop you like, Mom." But I was watching Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen, seeing how they observed Amanda's entrance and demeanor with the practiced eyes of people trained to spot predators who disguise themselves as caregivers. Amanda's perfect timing wasn't coincidental. She had been listening to our conversation and entered at precisely the right moment to disrupt the medical team's presentation of evidence. "We were just reviewing Priscilla's X-rays and discussing her treatment plan," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "How wonderful that she's getting such thorough care," Amanda replied, but I caught the slight tension in her voice. "I'm sure you'll find that everything points to a complete recovery from her unfortunate accident." The word accident hung in the air like a challenge, daring the medical professionals to contradict the family's official story, despite the overwhelming evidence spread across their examination table. Dr. Chen quietly gathered the X-ray films and medical records, but I knew she was documenting everything in my permanent file. For the first time in my life, there was professional legal evidence of what Amanda had been doing to me for decades. And Amanda knew it too. I could see the calculation behind her smile as she realized that medical professionals were no longer accepting our family's lies about my accident-prone nature. The battle lines were being drawn, and this time I wasn't facing Amanda's violence alone. Dr. Martinez asked my parents and Amanda to step outside while he conducted what he called a comprehensive trauma assessment. For the first time since my hospitalization, I was alone with someone who believed my story and had the authority to document the truth about my family's dysfunction. "Tell me about growing up with Amanda," he said, gently settling into the bedside chair with a notepad and the patient demeanor of someone prepared to listen for as long as necessary. The words came slowly at first, then faster as decades of suppressed memories surfaced like debris from a shipwreck. Amanda had always been 3 years older, stronger, and infinitely more charming than her awkward younger sister. She excelled at everything: honor roll student, varsity volleyball captain, homecoming princess, early admission to Ohio State with a full academic scholarship. I was the afterthought child born when Amanda was already established as the family star. While she collected trophies and awards, I struggled with reading comprehension and social anxiety. Our parents' attention focused entirely on nurturing Amanda's achievements and managing what they saw as my behavioral problems and learning difficulties. Amanda learned early that she could hurt me without consequences as long as she was careful about witnesses, I explained. She would pinch or twist my arm during family photos, smile sweetly for the camera while causing pain. If I cried or complained, Mom would scold me for ruining the picture or being too sensitive. What about more serious injuries? Those usually happened when we were alone, but Amanda always had explanations ready. When I was 8, she pushed me off the backyard swing set, fracturing my collarbone. She told our parents I had been showing off and fell while trying to jump from the swing at its highest point. They believed her completely and lectured me about being more careful. The pattern continued throughout our childhood and teenage years. Amanda would hurt me during private moments, then comfort me afterward while spinning stories about my clumsiness or attention-seeking behavior. Our parents never questioned her explanations because Amanda's lies were always more plausible than the truth that their perfect daughter was a violent predator. When I was 12, Amanda broke my nose by slamming a door into my face. She claimed it was an accident that she hadn't seen me standing behind the door when she opened it quickly. The emergency room doctor suggested it might have been intentional based on the impact pattern, but Amanda cried and said she would never hurt her little sister on purpose. How did your parents respond to the doctor's concerns? They were furious at the suggestion that Amanda could be violent. Dad threatened to report the doctor for making false accusations, and Mom kept saying the whole situation was traumatic enough without medical professionals adding to our family's stress with unfounded suspicions. Dr. Martinez made careful notes, documenting the long history of minimization and enablement that had allowed Amanda's abuse to continue unchecked. What about extended family grandparents, aunts and uncles, family friends? Did anyone else notice the pattern of injuries? That question unlocked a flood of painful memories about Grandma Eleanor, the one person who had consistently shown me unconditional love and protection. During family gatherings, Grandma would quietly pull me aside to examine bruises or ask gentle questions about how I was feeling at home. Grandma knew. I whispered, tears starting to flow as I remembered her worried face and careful questions. She never said anything directly, but she would create opportunities for me to spend time at her house, especially during school breaks when Amanda and I would normally be home together all day. Did she ever try to intervene or talk to your parents? I think she tried, but Mom always dismissed her concerns as elderly worry and interference. Grandma came from a generation where family problems were handled privately, so she focused on providing me with a safe space rather than confronting Amanda directly. But now I was remembering something else, conversations from Grandma's final weeks that I had dismissed as medication-induced confusion. She kept trying to tell me something important about papers and signatures, insisting that I needed to be careful about trusting anyone, even family members. Right before she died, Grandma was agitated about legal documents. She kept saying Amanda had been asking too many questions about her will and estate planning. At the time, I thought she was just worried about death and wanting to make sure everything was properly organized. What kind of questions was Amanda asking? About signatures and witnesses, about how estates are processed after someone dies. Grandma said Amanda had offered to help organize her important papers, but something about it made her uncomfortable. She made me promise to handle her final affairs personally, not to let anyone else access her documents or financial information. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Grandma hadn't been confused or paranoid. She'd been trying to warn me that Amanda was already planning to steal from her estate, probably researching the legal requirements for forging documents and manipulating inheritance proceedings. I think Amanda started stealing from Grandma while she was still alive, I said, my voice growing stronger as the pieces fell into place. The jewelry sales I discovered were just the most recent thefts. She probably started taking smaller items months earlier, testing whether Grandma would notice or remember what was missing. Did your grandmother ever mention specific concerns about missing items? She asked about her pearl necklace several times during her last month. Amanda told her it was being cleaned and repaired, but I never saw any jewelry store receipts or service records. And Grandma kept asking about her important papers, saying she couldn't find documents that should have been in her filing cabinet. Dr. Martinez leaned forward with increased intensity. What kind of documents? Legal papers, bank statements, insurance policies. Amanda had convinced Grandma to let her help organize everything for easier estate processing. She said it would be simpler if all the important documents were kept together in one location for when the time came. And your grandmother was uncomfortable with this arrangement. Very. She kept trying to tell me that something felt wrong, but she was weak from her illness and wasn't thinking clearly all the time. I should have paid more attention to her concerns instead of assuming they were just end-of-life anxiety. The guilt was overwhelming. Grandma had been trying to protect both of us from Amanda's schemes, but I had been too focused on her medical care and comfort to recognize the warnings about financial manipulation and theft. There's something else. I continued remembering another disturbing pattern. During Grandma's final months, she had episodes where she seemed confused about taking her medications. She would say she had already taken her pills when nurses hadn't given them yet, or she would refuse medications, claiming they made her feel strange. Did the medical staff investigate those concerns? They adjusted her medication schedule and had nurses supervise all doses, but the confusion continued sporadically. At the time, everyone assumed it was normal cognitive decline from her terminal illness. But now I was wondering if Amanda had been manipulating Grandma's medications during family visits, either giving extra doses to keep her confused or withholding prescribed drugs to create health crises that would require increased family involvement in her care. Amanda visited Grandma almost every day during those final weeks, I said slowly. She brought special meals and helped with personal care tasks that the nursing staff usually handled. Everyone praised her dedication and said what a devoted granddaughter she was. But you think she might have been using those visits for other purposes? To search for documents to practice forging Grandma's signature on various papers, maybe even to interfere with her medical care in ways that would make her more vulnerable to manipulation. Amanda is smart enough to research how medications affect elderly patients, and she would have had plenty of opportunities to experiment without anyone suspecting. The horrifying realization was taking shape. Amanda hadn't just stolen from our grandmother. She had actively hastened her death while positioning herself as the grieving, devoted family member who deserved to inherit everything. And when I discovered evidence of her crimes, she had tried to silence me permanently by throwing me down basement steps, planning to claim I had been drunk and suicidal if anyone questioned my injuries. Dr. Martinez closed his notepad and looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. Priscilla, what you're describing suggests a pattern of elder abuse, in addition to the domestic violence you've experienced. These are serious crimes that need to be reported to appropriate authorities. For the first time in my adult life, someone was taking Amanda's abuse seriously and offering to help me fight back instead of telling me to try harder to get along with my family. The question was whether I had the courage to pursue justice, knowing it would destroy the family relationships I had spent my entire life trying to preserve. Dr. Martinez explained that as a mandated reporter, he was legally required to contact both hospital social services and local police when medical evidence suggested domestic violence or elder abuse. Within 2 hours, my room filled with professionals. I had never expected to meet Detective Lisa Williams from the Columbus Police Department's Domestic Violence Unit and Jennifer Chen, a social worker who specialized in family trauma cases. Detective Williams was a woman in her early 40s with graying hair and the calm demeanor of someone who had heard every possible story about family violence. She introduced herself while setting up a digital recorder, explaining that my statement would be used to determine whether criminal charges were warranted. "I want you to know that you're safe here," she said, positioning herself where she could see both me and the door. "Hospital security has been notified that this is a sensitive interview, and no family members will be allowed in the room without your explicit permission." Jennifer Chen sat quietly nearby, ready to provide emotional support and connect me with resources if I decided to pursue legal action against Amanda. She had kind eyes and the patient presence of someone accustomed to helping people navigate the most difficult decisions of their lives. "Let's start with the incident that brought you here," Detective Williams said. "Tell me everything you remember about what happened in your grandmother's basement, in your own words and your own time." I recounted the confrontation about the stolen jewelry, Amanda's violent rage when I showed her the receipts, and the deliberate way she had grabbed my shoulders and pushed me backward down the stairs. Detective Williams took careful notes, asking clarifying questions about timing, physical positions, and exact words spoken during our argument. "After you lost consciousness, do you know how long you were alone before emergency services arrived?" "I have no idea. When I woke up in the ambulance, Amanda was riding along, crying and holding my hand. The paramedics said she had found me at the bottom of the stairs and called 911 immediately." "But you believe she waited some time before calling for help?" "I think she used those minutes to plan her story and maybe to destroy evidence of what we had been discussing. The receipts I showed her were missing when police processed the scene, along with other documents I had found in Grandma's filing cabinet." Detective Williams made a note to follow up on the missing evidence and the initial police report from the scene. Then she asked the question I had been dreading. "Are you willing to file criminal charges against your sister for assault?" The room fell silent while I processed the magnitude of that decision. Filing charges would mean acknowledging publicly that my family was not the loving, successful unit they presented to the world. It would mean Amanda's arrest court proceedings and permanent legal records that would follow both of us for the rest of our lives. "What would happen if I pressed charges?" "Based on your injuries and the medical evidence, we would arrest Amanda on charges of felony assault. Given the severity of your injuries and the potential for permanent damage, she would likely face significant jail time if convicted." "And if I don't press charges?" "Then Amanda faces no legal consequences for nearly killing you, and she remains free to continue her abusive behavior toward you or potentially other victims." Jennifer Chen leaned forward with gentle encouragement. "Priscilla, this decision is entirely yours to make, but I want you to know that we have resources to help protect you regardless of what you choose. There are legal options, counseling services, and safety planning support available." Before I could respond, my phone rang with a call from Amanda. Detective Williams nodded for me to answer, gesturing for me to put the call on speaker so she could listen to our conversation. "Hi, sweetie, how are you feeling today?" Amanda's voice was sickeningly sweet, but I could hear tension underneath her caring tone. "Better, thanks. The doctors are running some additional tests." "What kind of tests? I hope they're not putting you through unnecessary procedures. Hospital bills can be so expensive, and I know your insurance situation isn't ideal." "Just routine follow-up scans to make sure everything is healing properly." Good. Listen, I've been thinking about Grandma's estate situation, and I realize we should probably get everything sorted out quickly. I found some additional paperwork that needs your signature as co-executor. Could I bring the documents by later for you to review?" Detective Williams was writing furiously, noting Amanda's attempt to get me to sign legal papers while I was hospitalized and potentially under the influence of pain medication. "I'm pretty tired today. Maybe we could handle estate business after I'm discharged and feeling more clear-headed." "Oh, but the attorney says there are time-sensitive issues with the probate process. It would really be better to get these signatures completed as soon as possible. I could come by this evening after visiting hours when things are quieter." The suggestion of meeting after official visiting hours sent chills through me. Amanda wanted privacy for whatever she was planning away from medical staff who might witness or interfere with her manipulation. "Let me talk to the doctor about when I might be thinking clearly enough to handle legal decisions," I said carefully. "Of course, sweetheart, but don't overthink the situation. These are just routine signatures to move the estate process forward. Nothing complicated or concerning." After I hung up, Detective Williams looked grim. "She's trying to get you to sign documents while you're hospitalized and potentially impaired by medication. That's a classic predator move to secure legal advantage while victims are vulnerable. What do you think she wants me to sign?" Probably papers that would give her control over your grandmother's estate or documents that would prevent you from accessing information about missing assets. She knows you've discovered her theft, and she's trying to create legal barriers to protect herself. Jennifer Chen pulled out her tablet and showed me information about elder abuse investigations and financial crimes against vulnerable adults. Detective Williams, there's something else you should know. Priscilla has shared concerns about possible medication tampering and forged documents related to her grandmother's final months of life. What kind of medication tampering? I explained my memories of Grandma's confusion about her prescriptions and Amanda's frequent private visits during which she handled personal care tasks normally managed by nursing staff. Detective Williams requested Grandma's medical records and hospice care documentation to look for patterns that might support investigation of elder abuse charges. If we can prove Amanda was manipulating your grandmother's medications or forging legal documents, this becomes a much larger criminal case involving elder abuse fraud and potentially even homicide if we can show her actions hastened your grandmother's death. The word homicide hit me like a physical blow. I had been thinking of Amanda as a thief and an abuser, but if she had actually poisoned or medicated Grandma to death, she was something far more dangerous. There's one more thing, I said quietly. I think Amanda might have other victims. She works as a bank manager and has access to elderly customers' financial information. If she's been stealing from our family, she might be targeting vulnerable clients as well. Detective Williams immediately picked up her phone to contact the Financial Crimes Unit and request investigation into Amanda's professional activities. Within minutes, she was coordinating with federal banking regulators and the FBI to examine potential fraud involving elderly banking customers. Priscilla, what started as a domestic violence case is becoming a multi-agency investigation into systematic elder abuse and financial crimes. Your sister may have been operating an extensive fraud scheme targeting vulnerable elderly victims through her position at the bank. I felt simultaneous relief that Amanda's crimes were finally being taken seriously, and terror about what her reaction would be when she realized the full scope of the investigation closing in around her. Detective Williams gathered her materials and prepared to leave. I'm going to recommend that we place Amanda under surveillance while we build our case. In the meantime, hospital security will monitor your room and will provide you with emergency contacts if she attempts to threaten or intimidate you. For the first time in my adult life, law enforcement was taking steps to protect me from Amanda's violence, instead of dismissing my concerns as family drama that should be resolved privately. But I also knew that cornering Amanda would make her desperate, and desperate people were capable of anything to protect themselves from consequences. The next morning brought an unwelcome surprise that changed everything about my hospital stay. Amanda arrived during early visiting hours accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as Marcus Reed, her attorney and legal advisor for handling our family's estate matters. Marcus was tall and polished with silver hair and the confident manner of someone accustomed to intimidating people through legal expertise. He carried a leather briefcase and spoke in measured tones that made everything sound official and urgent. "Good morning, Priscilla. I hope you're feeling stronger today." Amanda said, her voice artificially bright, while her eyes remained cold and calculating. "Marcus has been helping me organize Grandma's estate paperwork, and we've discovered some concerning discrepancies that need immediate attention." "What kind of discrepancies?" I asked, immediately suspicious of any legal issues that required urgent action while I was hospitalized and medicated. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out several official-looking documents. "It appears your grandmother may have been suffering from more significant cognitive decline than anyone realized during her final months. There are multiple contradictory versions of her will sum, with signatures that appear questionable upon closer examination." He spread the papers across my bedside table, pointing to various signatures and dates that supposedly proved Grandma's mental confusion. We need to establish which documents represent her true final wishes, and that requires medical evaluation of her mental capacity during different time periods. Why does this need to be resolved right now? Because there are time limits for challenging estate documents, Amanda interjected. If we don't address these inconsistencies within the legal deadline, we could lose the opportunity to ensure Grandma's real intentions are honored. But something about their urgency felt calculated rather than genuinely concerned about honoring Grandma's wishes. Marcus was showing me documents I had never seen before, wills and codicils that supposedly superseded the version I remembered Grandma discussing with her longtime attorney. I'd like to speak with Grandma's attorney about these discrepancies before signing anything, I said carefully. Marcus and Amanda exchanged a quick glance that set off alarm bells in my mind. Unfortunately, Mr. Henderson retired suddenly due to health issues, and his files were transferred to our firm for continued management, Marcus explained smoothly. We're now the legal representatives for your grandmother's estate. That was news to me. Just 2 weeks before Grandma's death, Mr. Henderson had seemed healthy and fully engaged in finalizing her estate planning. The timing of his sudden retirement, coinciding with my discovery of Amanda's theft, seemed too convenient to be coincidental. I think I should wait until I'm discharged and can think more clearly before making any legal decisions, I said. Priscilla, I understand your caution, but delay could be very costly for both of us. Amanda pressed. These estate issues affect your inheritance too. If we don't resolve the contradictory documents quickly, the whole estate could end up in probate court for years. Marcus pulled out another set of papers that made my blood run cold. We also need to address some concerns about your mental health and decision-making capacity following your recent head injury. Hospital records show you've been making unusual accusations against family members, which could indicate post-traumatic stress or cognitive impairment. I realized they were trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so Amanda could gain legal control over both my inheritance and my medical decisions. If they succeeded, I would have no legal standing to challenge Amanda's theft or pursue criminal charges against her. These documents would establish Amanda as your temporary guardian while you recover from your injuries, Marcus continued. That way she can handle all legal and financial matters on your behalf, ensuring nothing falls through the cracks during your healing process. I don't need a guardian. I'm fully capable of making my own decisions. Are you? Amanda asked with mock concern. You've been telling medical staff that I deliberately pushed you down the stairs, which is obviously a false memory created by your head trauma. The doctors are worried about your confused state and ability to distinguish reality from injury-induced hallucinations. She was twisting my conversations with Dr. Martinez and Detective Williams, making it sound like medical professionals doubted my mental capacity rather than supporting my account of abuse. If she could convince a court that my accusations were symptoms of brain injury, she could discredit everything I had revealed about her criminal behavior. I need to speak with my own attorney before signing any legal documents, I said firmly. Of course, that's your right, Marcus replied smoothly. But given your current medical situation and the time-sensitive nature of these estate issues, it might be wise to allow Amanda to handle urgent matters while you focus on your physical recovery. At that moment, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway for morning rounds. He took in the scene quickly, legal documents spread across my bed, 2 people in business attire pressuring a hospitalized patient, and my obvious distress at their presence. I'm sorry, but I need to examine my patient now, he said with professional authority. You'll need to step outside while I conduct medical assessments. We're family, Amanda protested. Surely we can stay for a routine checkup. Hospital policy requires privacy for all medical evaluations. Dr. Martinez replied firmly, You're welcome to return during regular visiting hours once I've completed my examination. After Amanda and Marcus reluctantly left, Dr. Martinez immediately called hospital security and Jennifer Chen. Within minutes, my room was filled with people focused on protecting me from what they recognized as legal intimidation and elder abuse tactics. They're trying to have you declared incompetent so Amanda can control your legal and financial decisions, Jennifer explained. This is a common strategy used by financial abusers to silence victims and gain access to assets. Can they actually do that? Not without a proper court hearing and independent medical evaluation, Dr. Martinez assured me. But they can cause significant problems by filing frivolous guardianship petitions and forcing you to defend your mental capacity while you're still recovering from injuries. Detective Williams arrived within the hour carrying new information that changed everything about Amanda's situation. We've been investigating Marcus Reed and his law firm. He's been under federal investigation for elder abuse and financial fraud targeting vulnerable clients. Multiple families have filed complaints about forged documents and unauthorized legal actions. So, Amanda's attorney is also a criminal. It appears they've been working together to target elderly victims through Amanda's bank position. She identifies vulnerable customers with significant assets, then Marcus uses legal manipulation to gain access to their money and property. The scope of Amanda's criminal enterprise was far larger than simple sibling abuse or family theft. She was operating a sophisticated fraud scheme that had victimized dozens of elderly people throughout Central Ohio, and I had accidentally stumbled into the middle of their operation by discovering the theft from Grandma's estate. We're prepared to arrest both Amanda and Marcus today, Detective Williams continued, but we need your permission to use your case as evidence in the larger investigation. Your grandmother may have been one of their earliest victims, and your testimony could help us convict them for crimes against multiple families. For the first time since my hospitalization, I felt hope that justice might actually be possible. Amanda's desperation to silence me made sense. Now, I wasn't just a family member who knew about stolen jewelry. I was a witness who could expose an entire criminal conspiracy. But I also knew that desperate criminals were dangerous, especially when they realized their freedom depended on eliminating witnesses who could testify against them. My parents returned from Florida that evening with grim expressions and an attitude I had never seen before. Instead of their usual concerned hovering, they approached my bedside with the cold efficiency of people conducting unpleasant but necessary business. We've been talking with Amanda and Marcus about this legal situation, Dad announced without his customary small talk or inquiries about my medical condition. There seems to be some confusion about Grandma's estate and your role in creating complications. What kind of complications? Mom pulled out a folder thick with documents and spread them across the bedside table, where Marcus had placed his papers earlier. These are medical bills from your hospitalization plus projected costs for ongoing treatment and rehabilitation. The total is approaching $60,000, and your insurance coverage has significant gaps. Amanda has generously offered to cover these expenses through the Family Emergency Fund. Dad continued, but only if we can resolve the estate issues quickly and quietly, without involving outside parties who don't understand our family dynamics. I stared at them in disbelief. My parents were using my medical bills as leverage to force my cooperation with Amanda's legal manipulation. They were essentially blackmailing me while I lay in a hospital bed, recovering from injuries their daughter had inflicted. What exactly are you asking me to do? Sign these guardianship papers giving Amanda temporary authority to handle your legal and financial affairs, Mom said, pointing to documents that would strip away my right to make independent decisions. And stop making false accusations about family members to hospital staff and outside authorities. False accusations. Dad's face flushed with anger I had rarely seen directed at me. You've been telling people that Amanda deliberately hurt you, which is not only untrue but damaging to her professional reputation and our family's standing in the community. Amanda works with elderly bank customers, Mom added. These wild stories about theft and violence could cost her career and destroy everything she's worked to build. Is that really what you want to ruin your sister's life because you're confused about what happened during your accident? They had completely dismissed the medical evidence, the police investigation, and my detailed account of Amanda's criminal behavior. Worse, they were characterizing my reports of abuse as malicious lies designed to hurt Amanda rather than truth-telling that could prevent future victims. "The medical evidence shows that Amanda grabbed me and pushed me down those stairs," I said firmly. "Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen have documented injury patterns that prove this wasn't an accident." "Doctors can be wrong," Dad replied coldly. "Medical interpretation isn't the same as absolute fact, and we know Amanda would never intentionally hurt you. You're obviously confused about what happened, probably due to your head injury and medications." Mom leaned closer with tears in her eyes, but her emotion felt manipulative rather than genuine. "Sweetheart, we've all been under tremendous stress since Grandma's death and your accident. Amanda is trying to hold the family together while dealing with complex legal issues, and these accusations are making an already difficult situation impossible." "What legal issues?" "Grandma's estate has irregularities that need to be resolved quickly to avoid probate complications," Dad explained. "Amanda and Marcus have been working around the clock to sort through contradictory documents and ensure everyone receives their proper inheritance." But I remembered what Detective Williams had said about federal investigations into Marcus Reed's law firm and the pattern of elder abuse targeting bank customers. My parents either didn't know about Amanda's criminal activities or they were choosing to ignore evidence that would force them to acknowledge their daughter was a predator. "Have you spoken with Detective Williams about the investigation into Amanda's activities?" I asked. Mom's face went white, and Dad clenched his jaw with barely controlled rage. "We are not speaking with police about private family matters. Detective Williams has been fed false information by medical staff who don't understand our situation. The medical staff have evidence of years of abuse disguised as accidents," I said, growing stronger despite their intimidation attempts. "This isn't about family privacy. This is about crimes that have been documented by multiple professionals." "Alleged crimes," Dad corrected harshly, "based on speculation and misinterpretation by people who don't know our family history." But then Mom said something that revealed the truth about their position. "Amanda has been supporting us financially for years, helping with our mortgage payments and medical expenses, since Dad's business struggled during the recession. We can't afford to lose that assistance over misunderstandings about accidents and estate paperwork." The financial dependency explained everything. My parents weren't just protecting Amanda's reputation or denying her criminal behavior. They were protecting their own financial security, which depended on Amanda's continued income from whatever sources she was using. "How exactly has Amanda been helping with your expenses?" I asked, already dreading the answer. Dad looked uncomfortable for the first time during our conversation. "She's made generous contributions to our retirement fund and helped us avoid foreclosure when the insurance agency was struggling. Family helps family during difficult times. Where did Amanda get money to pay your mortgage and medical bills? Her bank manager's salary wouldn't cover both her own expenses and yours." Mom and Dad exchanged a guilty look that confirmed my worst fears. They knew Amanda's money came from criminal sources, and they had been accepting stolen funds while choosing to remain ignorant about her methods. "Amanda has been successful in her career and made wise investments," Mom said weakly. "We didn't ask for detailed financial information. We just accepted her generosity when she offered to help family members in need." But I was thinking about Detective Williams' information regarding the investigation into Amanda's fraud schemes targeting elderly bank customers. The money my parents had been receiving was probably stolen from vulnerable victims who trusted Amanda with their financial security. Mom, Dad, Amanda has been stealing from elderly people through her position at the bank. The FBI is investigating her for fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. The money she's been giving you belongs to victims she's been targeting." "That's impossible," Dad said automatically, but his voice lacked conviction. "Detective Williams can show you evidence of Amanda's crimes dating back years. Multiple families have filed complaints about unauthorized withdrawals and forged documents. Grandma was one of her victims." Mom started crying, but I couldn't tell if her tears were from genuine shock or grief about losing their financial support. Amanda wouldn't steal from Grandma. She loved her as much as anyone. "Amanda poisoned Grandma to keep her confused and compliant while she forged documents and transferred money," I said bluntly. That's why Grandma was so agitated about her medications and legal papers during her final weeks. The room fell silent except for Mom's quiet sobbing and the steady beeping of my medical monitors. My parents were finally confronting the reality that they had been accessories to Amanda's crimes, accepting stolen money while choosing to remain willfully ignorant about its source. "What happens to us if Amanda is arrested?" Dad asked quietly, the question revealing his primary concern. "You'll probably be investigated as accessories depending on how much you knew about the source of her money, but cooperating with authorities and helping victims recover stolen assets might help reduce charges. Or we could handle this quietly within the family and avoid destroying everyone's lives over mistakes and misunderstandings," Mom suggested desperately. They were still trying to minimize Amanda's crimes and protect themselves from consequences, even after learning about the scope of her fraud and abuse. Their loyalty was ultimately to their own financial security rather than justice for Amanda's victims or protection for their own daughter. I realized that my parents had never really seen me as someone worthy of protection. Throughout my childhood and adult life, they had sacrificed my safety and well-being to preserve Amanda's advantages and their own social standing. Now they were asking me to sacrifice my legal rights and my chance for justice in order to protect their financial security and Amanda's criminal enterprise. For the first time in my life, I was ready to choose my own well-being over my family's demands for loyalty and silence. Despite my physical limitations and the constant stream of family pressure, I began conducting my own investigation from my hospital bed. Jennifer Chen had provided me with contact information for various agencies and resources, and I used my laptop and phone to piece together the full scope of Amanda's criminal activities. My first call was to Grandma's longtime attorney, Mr. Henderson, whose supposed sudden retirement had been the excuse for Marcus Reed taking over her legal affairs. After searching online, I found his home number and discovered something that made my blood boil with rage. "Mr. Henderson, this is Priscilla Whitmore, Eleanor Whitmore's granddaughter. I'm calling about my grandmother's estate." "Priscilla, how wonderful to hear from you. I've been meaning to contact you about some concerning issues with your grandmother's legal documents. How are you recovering from your accident? You know about my hospitalization. I received a call from someone claiming to represent your family, asking about transferring your grandmother's files due to your incapacity following a severe head injury. But something about the request didn't seem right, so I've been trying to reach you directly." My heart started racing as I realized Amanda and Marcus had been using my hospitalization as part of their scheme to gain access to Grandma's real legal documents. "Mr. Henderson, have you retired or transferred any files to Marcus Reed's law firm?" "Absolutely not. I'm still practicing and still serving as executor of your grandmother's estate. Who told you I had retired?" "Marcus Reed claimed you had health problems and transferred all of Grandma's files to his firm for continued management." Mr. Henderson's voice turned grim. "Miss Whitmore, I've never heard of Marcus Reed, and I certainly haven't transferred any client files to his firm. Someone has been impersonating my authority to gain access to your grandmother's estate documents." I explained everything: the theft discovery, Amanda's violent assault, the forged documents Marcus had shown me, and the attempts to have me declared mentally incompetent. Mr. Henderson listened with growing concern and took detailed notes about each fraudulent action. "Your grandmother updated her will 6 weeks before her death," he revealed. "She was very specific about wanting you to inherit the majority of her estate, including the House Lake cabin and all personal property. She only left Amanda a small monetary bequest because she had discovered evidence of theft and wanted to protect the rest of her assets." "What kind of evidence?" "Bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures on investment account changes, and missing jewelry that she had documented for insurance purposes. Your grandmother suspected Amanda had been stealing from her for months, and she changed her will to prevent further theft after her death." This was exactly what I had suspected. Grandma's agitation during her final weeks wasn't medication-induced confusion. It was justified fear that Amanda was systematically robbing her while she was too weak to protect herself. "There's something else," Mr. Henderson continued. "Your grandmother recorded video messages for you before she died explaining her concerns about Amanda and providing evidence of the theft. She asked me to keep the recordings in my office safe, accessible only to you after her death. Amanda doesn't know about these videos. No one knows except you and me. Your grandmother was very careful to create this evidence in secret during Amanda's work hours when she couldn't monitor or interfere with our meetings." Mr. Henderson agreed to meet with Detective Williams and provide all documentation related to Grandma's real estate planning and the evidence she had gathered about Amanda's crimes. He also offered to testify about the fraudulent attempts to access her files using false claims about his retirement. My next call was to Grandma's bank, where I spoke with the Fraud Prevention Department about unauthorized account activity during her final months. The customer service manager, Patricia Wong, was immediately helpful when I explained that I was investigating potential elder abuse and financial crimes. "We've had several inquiries about Mrs. Whitmore's accounts recently," she said. "Someone claiming to be her legal representative has been requesting detailed transaction histories and account access information." "What kind of information were they seeking?" "Complete records of all deposits, withdrawals, and account changes for the past 2 years. They claimed they needed the documentation for estate settlement purposes, but something about their requests seemed inappropriate." "Did they provide proper legal authorization?" "They presented documents that appeared legitimate, but our legal department flagged them for further review. The signatures didn't match our samples, and the notarization looked suspicious." Patricia agreed to preserve all records of the fraudulent access attempts and provide them to law enforcement for investigation. She also revealed that Amanda had made several large cash withdrawals from Grandma's accounts during her final weeks, using what appeared to be forged withdrawal slips. "The total amount withdrawn was over $30,000. Patricia explained. "We normally require additional verification for large cash transactions involving elderly customers, but the person making the withdrawals had intimate knowledge of the account holder's personal information and financial history." My final call was to Grandma's longtime neighbor, Mrs. Dorothy Stevens, who had lived next door for over 20 years and had helped keep an eye on Grandma during her illness. Dorothy had always been observant and caring, the kind of neighbor who noticed changes in routine and was genuinely concerned about others' well-being. "Oh, Priscilla, I'm so glad you called," Dorothy said warmly. "I've been worried about your family since Eleanor passed, and I heard about your terrible accident. How are you recovering?" "Better each day, thank you. Mrs. Stevens, I'm calling because I have some questions about the weeks before Grandma died. Did you notice anything unusual about her visitors or daily routine?" "Well, Amanda was there almost every day toward the end, which was wonderful, but I did notice some odd things that concerned me." "What kind of things?" "Amanda would arrive with large bags and boxes, like she was cleaning out the house while Eleanor was still alive. She made multiple trips to her car carrying heavy items, but when I asked about it, she said she was just organizing Eleanor's belongings to make things easier for the family later." "Did you see what she was carrying?" "It looked like household items, maybe books and decorative pieces, but the timing seemed strange, taking things while Eleanor was still living in the house and might want access to her belongings." Dorothy had also noticed that Grandma seemed more confused and agitated on days when Amanda visited, often appearing disoriented or upset after spending time alone with her granddaughter. Eleanor mentioned to me several times that she couldn't find important papers or remember conversations about legal matters. She seemed frustrated and worried about memory problems, but her mind was actually quite sharp most of the time. "Did she say anything specific about missing documents?" "She was very concerned about her will and financial papers. She told me she thought someone had been going through her filing cabinet because documents were out of order or missing entirely. She asked me to witness her signature on some new papers, but Amanda arrived before we could complete whatever Eleanor wanted to do." The pattern was becoming undeniably clear. Amanda had been systematically stealing from Grandma while she was dying, taking advantage of her physical weakness to remove evidence and manipulate legal documents. When Grandma tried to protect her remaining assets by changing her will, Amanda had escalated her efforts to maintain control over the inheritance. And when I accidentally discovered evidence of the theft, Amanda had tried to silence me permanently with violence that nearly cost me my life. But now I had witnesses' documentation and professional support to expose Amanda's crimes and ensure she faced consequences for years of abuse and fraud. The question was whether I had the strength to see the investigation through to prosecution, knowing it would mean the complete destruction of my family relationships and the public exposure of secrets we had hidden for decades. For the first time in my adult life, I chose truth and justice over family loyalty and keeping peace at any cost. The next morning brought a coordinated effort between multiple law enforcement agencies that transformed my hospital room into the unofficial headquarters of a major criminal investigation. Detective Williams arrived with FBI Special Agent Karen Morrison, who specialized in financial crimes against elderly victims, and Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen, who would be prosecuting the case. Special Agent Morrison spread crime scene photos and financial records across 2 rolling tables, creating a visual timeline of Amanda's criminal activities that spanned over 3 years. Your sister and Marcus Reed have been operating what we call a sweetheart scam, targeting elderly bank customers with significant assets and no close family oversight. How does it work? Amanda identifies vulnerable customers through her position as bank manager, focusing on elderly individuals who live alone or have limited family contact. She builds trust relationships over months, offering extra assistance with banking needs and gradually learning about their personal lives and financial situations. Agent Morrison showed me photographs of Amanda's victims, 12 elderly individuals whose families had reported suspicious financial activity and unauthorized access to accounts. The youngest was 73, the oldest 91, and their combined losses exceeded $2 million. Once Amanda establishes trust and access to financial information, Marcus creates fraudulent legal documents, giving them power of attorney or guardianship authority. Then they systematically drain accounts, sell property, and transfer assets to shell companies they control. What happened to the victims? Most died within months of the financial exploitation, either from natural causes or from what appears to be medication tampering designed to hasten death and prevent discovery of the crimes. The photographs showed frail elderly faces, people who had trusted Amanda with their financial security and paid for that trust with their life savings and potentially their lives. I felt sick thinking about Grandma being just one victim among many in Amanda's systematic predation on vulnerable elderly people. Detective Williams opened another folder containing search warrant results from Amanda's home office and Marcus's law firm. We executed simultaneous searches yesterday while Amanda was visiting you at the hospital. The evidence is overwhelming. They had found forged legal documents for dozens of elderly victims, detailed financial records, tracking stolen assets, and computer files containing research about medication interactions and dosage calculations that could cause confusion or death in elderly patients. Most damaging is Amanda's personal journal, where she documented her strategies for identifying and exploiting vulnerable targets. Agent Morrison continued. She wrote detailed notes about each victim's weaknesses, family situations, and optimal timing for financial manipulation. She showed me photocopied pages from Amanda's handwriting that made me physically ill to read. Amanda had categorized elderly people like hunting prey, noting which victims were easily confused, isolated, or trusting in ways that could be exploited for financial gain. Grandma was listed as Target E12, with notes about her declining health, limited family oversight, and substantial liquid assets. Amanda had been planning Grandma's financial exploitation for months before beginning the actual theft, studying her habits and vulnerabilities like a predator stalking prey. The medical evidence is equally compelling, Detective Williams added, showing me hospital records and autopsy reports. 3 of Amanda's victims died from apparent medication overdoses that were initially attributed to accidental confusion about prescription dosages. They were murdered. The toxicology evidence suggests deliberate poisoning using combinations of their prescribed medications in doses calculated to cause fatal cardiac events. Amanda had access to detailed information about each victim's prescriptions through medical releases they signed for banking purposes. Agent Morrison pulled out the most disturbing evidence video recordings from security cameras at the nursing facility, where Grandma had spent her final weeks. The footage showed Amanda entering Grandma's room with small containers and syringes, administering what appeared to be unauthorized medications during her daily visits. Your grandmother's autopsy shows elevated levels of sedatives and blood pressure medications that weren't prescribed by her physicians. The levels weren't immediately fatal, but they would have caused confusion, weakness, and gradual organ failure, consistent with natural decline. Amanda was slowly poisoning her to death, while simultaneously stealing her assets and forging legal documents to maintain control over the inheritance. Your grandmother probably suspected what was happening, which explains her agitation about missing papers and concern about her medications. Assistant District Attorney Chen reviewed the criminal charges they were preparing against Amanda and Marcus: elder abuse, financial exploitation, forgery, fraud, conspiracy, and 3 counts of homicide in connection with the deaths of previous victims. Based on the medical evidence and toxicology reports, we believe Amanda murdered at least 3 elderly individuals after stealing their assets, he explained. Your grandmother's death appears to follow the same pattern, making this potentially a 4th homicide. What about my assault? Attempted murder. The medical evidence clearly shows Amanda intended to cause serious bodily harm when she threw you down those stairs. If Dr. Martinez hadn't recognized the signs of abuse and called police, Amanda might have succeeded in silencing you permanently. The scope of Amanda's crimes was far beyond anything I had imagined when I first discovered the missing jewelry. She wasn't just a thief or an abuser. She was a serial killer who used her position at the bank to identify elderly victims and systematically murdered them after stealing their life savings. How many total victims do you think there might be? We're investigating over 20 suspicious deaths of elderly bank customers who had recent financial irregularities before dying, Agent Morrison replied. Amanda has been working at First National Bank for 7 years, and the pattern of exploitation appears to have started shortly after she was promoted to management. Detective Williams showed me additional evidence that connected my parents to the criminal conspiracy. Financial records showed regular transfers from accounts controlled by Amanda and Marcus to my parents' mortgage and credit card payments, totaling over $100,000 during the past 2 years. Your parents received stolen money and failed to report suspicious circumstances, making them accessories after the fact, she explained. However, they're cooperating with our investigation and have agreed to testify against Amanda in exchange for reduced charges. I felt a mixture of relief that my parents were finally acknowledging Amanda's crimes and disgust that their cooperation was motivated by legal self-interest rather than moral outrage about her actions. When will arrests be made? Today, Agent Morrison answered. We have arrest warrants for Amanda Marcus and 3 associates who helped launder stolen assets through fake investment companies. Amanda will be arrested when she arrives for her afternoon visit to the hospital. Will I have to testify at trial? Your testimony will be crucial for establishing the pattern of abuse and Amanda's violent behavior when confronted with evidence of her crimes. But you'll have extensive support throughout the legal process, including victim advocacy services and counseling resources. Assistant District Attorney Chen assured me that the prosecution had overwhelming evidence even without my testimony, but that my account of Amanda's abuse and the assault would help establish her willingness to use violence against anyone who threatened to expose her criminal activities. The physical evidence speaks for itself, he said. Medical records, financial documentation, toxicology reports, and testimony from multiple witnesses create an unshakable case against both Amanda and Marcus. As the law enforcement officials gathered their materials and prepared to leave, I felt simultaneous relief and terror about what was coming. Amanda's arrest would end her ability to hurt more elderly victims, but it would also trigger her final desperate attempts to escape consequences or eliminate witnesses who could testify against her. Detective Williams stationed a plainclothes officer in the hospital corridor and provided me with emergency contact numbers in case Amanda attempted to threaten or intimidate me before her arrest. "She doesn't know yet that we've discovered the full scope of her crimes," she warned. "When she realizes the investigation extends far beyond your assault, she might become extremely dangerous." For the first time since my hospitalization, I felt hope that justice would actually be served, and that Amanda's victims would receive some measure of vindication for the crimes committed against them. But I also knew that facing Amanda during her arrest and throughout the trial process would require more courage than I had ever needed in my entire life. The arrests made national news within hours. Amanda's perp walk from the hospital to the police station was broadcast live on local television, showing my perfectly composed sister in handcuffs, while reporters shouted questions about elder abuse and murder charges. Channel 6 News led their evening broadcast with the headline, "Trusted Bank Manager Accused of Murdering Elderly Customers," accompanied by Amanda's professional headshot from the First National Bank website. The contrast between her polished corporate image and the serious criminal charges created exactly the kind of shocking story that dominated social media and local conversation. By the following morning, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from journalists wanting interviews about growing up with a suspected serial killer. I declined all media requests on advice from victim services, but I couldn't avoid hearing about the extensive coverage that was transforming our family's private dysfunction into public entertainment. The Columbus Dispatch published a front-page investigation titled, "The Sweetheart Killer: How a Bank Manager Used Trust to Murder," detailing Amanda's methods and the scope of victimization across central Ohio. Reporter Sarah Kim had interviewed families of Amanda's victims, creating heartbreaking portraits of elderly individuals who had trusted her with their financial security and paid for that trust with their lives. Eleanor Patterson, 87, had been Amanda's first known victim 3 years earlier. Her daughter Michelle contacted me after seeing news coverage about Amanda's arrest, sharing the painful story of her mother's final months. Mom was so proud that the bank manager took special interest in helping her manage her investments, Michelle told me during a tearful phone conversation. Amanda visited our house several times, bringing cookies and spending hours discussing financial planning. We thought she was just exceptionally caring and professional. But Amanda had been gathering information about Eleanor's assets and family situation, identifying her as an ideal victim with substantial savings and limited oversight from busy adult children who lived in other states. Mom started having episodes of confusion and memory problems that her doctor couldn't explain. She would call me crying about missing money or legal papers she couldn't find. We attributed it to normal aging, but now we know Amanda was drugging her and stealing from her accounts. Eleanor died of apparent heart failure 6 months after Amanda began her special assistance, leaving behind depleted bank accounts and forged legal documents that transferred her remaining assets to shell companies controlled by Amanda and Marcus. "The worst part is that Mom died thinking she was losing her mind," Michelle continued. "She felt ashamed about the memory problems and financial confusion, never realizing she was being systematically poisoned and robbed by someone she trusted." Similar stories emerged from other victims' families as news coverage prompted people to come forward with suspicions they had harbored for months or years. The Columbus Police Department established a special hotline for reporting potential crimes related to Amanda's activities, and within 3 days they received over 60 calls from concerned family members. Local television stations interviewed former co-workers from First National Bank, many of whom expressed shock at the charges against someone they had considered a model employee and caring colleague. Amanda was always the first person to volunteer for community events and charity drives, said Janet Mills, a teller who had worked with Amanda for 5 years. She organized our annual fundraiser for the Senior Center and seemed genuinely passionate about helping elderly customers with their banking needs. But other co-workers admitted they had noticed troubling patterns they hadn't felt comfortable reporting at the time. Amanda spent a lot of time with elderly customers outside normal business hours, revealed Tom Harrison, a loan officer who had occasionally questioned Amanda's methods. She would offer to visit their homes for financial consultations, which seemed unusual, but management praised her customer service excellence. I noticed she was very interested in customers who didn't have family members involved in their banking, added Patricia Stone, another bank employee. She would ask detailed questions about their personal lives and living situations, claiming she wanted to provide better service. The bank's corporate leadership issued statements expressing shock and cooperation with law enforcement, but they also faced serious questions about oversight and employee screening procedures that had allowed Amanda's crimes to continue undetected for years. The most painful media coverage involved interviews with my former classmates and neighbors, many of whom now reinterpreted memories of Amanda's childhood behavior in light of the criminal charges. Amanda was always charming and successful, but there was something cold about her even as a kid, recalled David Martinez, who had lived on our street during elementary school. She would be sweet to adults but cruel to other children when parents weren't watching. I remember Priscilla always had bruises and broken bones, said Jennifer Walsh, my former high school lab partner. We used to joke that she was the clumsiest person we knew, but looking back, the injuries seemed suspicious. Amanda was always there to comfort her and explain what had happened. Several teachers came forward with memories of Amanda's manipulative behavior and my frequent injuries that they now regretted not reporting to authorities. Amanda was an exceptional student who knew exactly how to charm teachers and administrators, said Mrs. Carol Turner, our former elementary principal. But I noticed that Priscilla seemed fearful around her sister and often had unexplained injuries. I should have investigated more thoroughly instead of accepting the family's explanations. The community that had once celebrated Amanda's achievements was now grappling with the reality that they had been deceived by a predator who used charm and professional success to mask her criminal behavior. Local churches and senior centers where Amanda had volunteered were reviewing their policies for background checks and supervision of volunteers who worked with vulnerable populations. The broader media coverage sparked national conversation about elder abuse and the vulnerability of isolated seniors to financial exploitation by trusted professionals. News programs featured experts discussing warning signs that families should watch for and systemic changes needed to protect elderly individuals from predators like Amanda. For me, watching the media coverage was both vindicating and overwhelming. After decades of having my reports of abuse dismissed as family drama or personal sensitivity, the entire community was finally seeing Amanda's true nature and acknowledging the reality of her violent, predatory behavior. But the public attention also meant that our family's dysfunction was being dissected and analyzed by thousands of strangers who felt entitled to judge our parents' enablement and my own survival choices. I received hundreds of messages through social media and email from other abuse survivors who shared their own stories and offered support for my decision to pursue criminal charges against Amanda. Their encouragement gave me strength during the most difficult period of my life. But I also received criticism from people who believed family problems should be handled privately, and that I was betraying Amanda by cooperating with law enforcement instead of seeking reconciliation and forgiveness. The media attention would continue throughout the trial process, but seeing Amanda's crimes acknowledged publicly and her victims' stories told with respect and dignity made the intrusion feel worthwhile. For the first time in my life, the truth about Amanda's behavior was being taken seriously by people with the power to deliver consequences, and that validation was worth any amount of public scrutiny. 6 months after Amanda's arrest, the prosecution team began intensive preparation for what would become one of the most complex elder abuse trials in Ohio history. The case involved 4 murder charges, multiple counts of financial exploitation, and dozens of fraud-related offenses, spanning 7 years of criminal activity. Assistant District Attorney Michael Chen assembled a prosecution team of specialists in financial crimes, elder abuse, and domestic violence to handle the massive amount of evidence and witness testimony required to convict Amanda and Marcus on all charges. My role as a key witness meant spending countless hours with prosecutors, reviewing evidence and preparing for cross-examination that would challenge every aspect of my testimony about Amanda's abusive behavior and the assault that had finally exposed her crimes. The defense is going to attack your credibility by claiming your head injury affected your memory and judgment, Chen warned during one of our preparation sessions. They'll argue that your accusations against Amanda are false memories created by trauma and medication. Marcus Reed had hired expensive defense attorneys who were already laying groundwork for an insanity defense, combined with claims that Amanda was the victim of a delusional sister seeking attention through false accusations. They have psychiatrists prepared to testify that Amanda suffers from dissociative disorder and wasn't responsible for her actions during the period when crimes occurred, explained prosecutor Jennifer Martinez. Our job is to show the jury that Amanda's behavior was calculated, deliberate, and motivated by greed rather than mental illness. The medical evidence would be crucial for establishing Amanda's competency and intent. Dr. Martinez and Dr. Chen were prepared to testify about the deliberate nature of my injuries and the pattern of abuse documented in my medical history. But the prosecution's strongest evidence came from Amanda's own documentation of her crimes. Her personal journal contained detailed plans for exploiting each victim, including research about their medical conditions and optimal timing for financial manipulation. She wrote step-by-step instructions for gaining elderly victims' trust and accessing their accounts. Chen showed me photocopied pages from Amanda's handwriting. These entries prove premeditation and sophisticated planning, not impulsive actions by someone suffering from mental illness. Amanda had documented her research into medication interactions, noting which combinations would cause confusion without immediately fatal results. She had studied each victim's prescription medications and calculated dosages that would achieve the desired effect of making them more compliant and less able to recognize financial irregularities. The journal also contains her reactions to your discovery of the theft, Prosecutor Martinez pointed out. She wrote about feeling threatened by your questions and considering permanent solutions to prevent exposure of her activities. The entry dated 2 days before my assault was particularly chilling. P is asking too many questions about the jewelry and estate papers. Need to handle this situation before she ruins everything. Family loyalty only goes so far when survival is at stake. Amanda had literally documented her decision to silence me through violence, providing written evidence of premeditation that would make the attempted murder charge nearly impossible to defend against. The prosecution also had extensive financial evidence showing the systematic nature of Amanda's crimes. Forensic accountants had traced stolen money through multiple shell companies and investment accounts, creating a clear picture of how Amanda and Marcus had laundered over $2 million from their elderly victims. The money trail shows sophisticated financial planning that required months of preparation for each victim, explained FBI agent Morrison. Amanda would research each target's assets for weeks before beginning the exploitation process. Bank records showed that Amanda had accessed elderly customers' accounts outside normal business hours, using her management privileges to review financial information and identify the wealthiest targets with the fewest family safeguards. She specifically targeted customers who lived alone, had limited family contact, and maintained large cash balances or investment portfolios. Agent Morrison continued. The victim selection process was methodical and predatory. The prosecution team also prepared testimony from Amanda's surviving victims, elderly individuals who had experienced her exploitation but survived the poisoning attempts that killed others. Frank Wilson, 82, would testify about Amanda's gradual infiltration into his financial affairs and the mysterious health problems that began after she started her special assistance program. She convinced me to give her power of attorney by claiming it would protect my assets if I became incapacitated, Frank explained during a practice session. Within weeks, money started disappearing from my accounts, but I was too confused from the medications she was giving me to understand what was happening. Frank's testimony would be particularly powerful because he had recorded several conversations with Amanda, using a small device his suspicious daughter had given him. The recordings captured Amanda discussing financial transfers and medication schedules in ways that clearly demonstrated her criminal intent. Margaret Foster, 78, had survived Amanda's poisoning attempts and would testify about the systematic way Amanda had gained access to her home and finances. She brought me meals and medications claiming she wanted to help since I didn't have family nearby, Margaret recalled. But after eating her food or taking pills, she provided I would feel disoriented and weak. My regular medications seemed to stop working properly. Margaret's daughter had become suspicious when her mother's personality changed dramatically and her bank accounts showed unauthorized withdrawals. They contacted police before Amanda could complete her exploitation process, making Margaret one of the few victims who survived with her assets largely intact. The emotional impact of victim testimony would be balanced by expert witnesses who could explain the sophisticated nature of Amanda's crimes and the deliberate planning required to carry them out. Dr. Patricia Wong, a geriatric psychiatrist, would testify about the calculated way Amanda selected vulnerable elderly targets and manipulated their trust for financial gain. This wasn't random, opportunistic crime, Dr. Wong explained during preparation. Amanda studied each victim's psychological vulnerabilities and tailored her approach to exploit their specific fears and needs. Preparing for trial also meant confronting the reality that my own family would likely testify on Amanda's behalf, despite the overwhelming evidence of her crimes. Mom and Dad had initially cooperated with the investigation to reduce their own legal exposure, but as the trial approached, they seemed to be reconsidering their position and returning to their pattern of protecting Amanda at all costs. "Your parents have been meeting with Amanda's defense team," Chen warned me. "They may testify that your accusations against Amanda are part of a lifelong pattern of attention-seeking behavior and false claims." The thought of my parents betraying me again, this time in open court, was almost more painful than Amanda's physical assault, but I was prepared to face their testimony and continue pursuing justice regardless of whether my family supported me or abandoned me completely. The trial would test everything I had learned about standing up for myself and choosing truth over family loyalty, but I was finally ready to confront Amanda's crimes publicly and ensure that her victims received justice. The trial of Amanda Whitmore and Marcus Reed began on a cold February morning in the Franklin County Courthouse, drawing national media attention and filling the courtroom gallery with victims' families, local residents, and legal observers interested in what prosecutors called one of the most systematic elder abuse cases in recent memory. Judge Patricia Hamilton presided over the proceedings with the stern efficiency of someone who had handled complex criminal cases for over 20 years. She made it clear from the beginning that she would not tolerate disruption from media or spectators, and that the focus would remain on evidence rather than emotional theatrics. Amanda entered the courtroom wearing a conservative navy suit and minimal makeup, attempting to project the image of a wrongly accused professional rather than a predatory serial killer. Her defense team had clearly coached her to appear vulnerable and confused, occasionally dabbing her eyes with tissues during particularly damaging testimony. Marcus sat beside her with the arrogant demeanor of someone confident that his legal expertise would help him escape consequences for his crimes. His expensive attorneys had built their defense around claims that Amanda had manipulated him into participating in illegal activities without his full understanding of their criminal nature. Prosecutor Michael Chen opened with a devastating summary of the evidence against both defendants, describing Amanda as a calculating predator who had used her position at the bank to identify and systematically murder elderly victims after stealing their life savings. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, over the next 2 weeks, you will hear evidence of crimes so calculated and heartless that they challenge our basic understanding of human decency. Chen began. The defendant, Amanda Whitmore, didn't simply steal money from elderly victims. She befriended them, gained their trust, poisoned them to death, and then celebrated her success by planning her next murder. He presented Amanda's journal entries as evidence of premeditation, reading her own words about selecting victims and calculating optimal dosages of stolen medications. The jury listened with visible shock as Chen described how Amanda had documented each stage of her crimes with the pride of someone perfecting a profitable system. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was a business model based on murder. The prosecution's medical evidence began with Dr. Martinez testifying about the pattern of injuries that had first raised suspicions about my family's account of an accidental fall. The bruising on Miss Whitmore's shoulders was consistent with forceful gripping by human hands. He explained using photographs and anatomical charts to demonstrate how my injuries proved Amanda's assault. The trajectory of her fall and the nature of her fractures could not have resulted from simple clumsiness or accidental stumbling. Dr. Chen's radiology testimony established the pattern of previous injuries that documented Amanda's lifetime of abuse disguised as accidents. X-rays spanning 5 years showed repeated fractures and trauma consistent with systematic physical violence. Medical records don't lie, Dr. Chen told the jury. Miss Whitmore's injury history shows clear evidence of ongoing assault by someone with regular access to her, someone she trusted enough to be alone with despite repeated violence. The most powerful testimony came from Amanda's surviving victims, elderly individuals who had experienced her systematic exploitation but lived to describe her methods. Frank Wilson's recorded conversations with Amanda were played for the jury, capturing her voice as she discussed transferring his money and adjusting his medication schedule to maintain optimal confusion levels. "I need you to sign these investment papers while you're having a good day," Amanda's voice said clearly through the courtroom speakers. "Sometimes your memory isn't as sharp as it used to be, so we should handle important business when you're feeling alert." The recordings proved that Amanda was deliberately creating and exploiting Frank's cognitive impairment rather than simply taking advantage of natural decline. Margaret Foster testified about Amanda's gradual infiltration into her daily routine and the mysterious health problems that began after accepting her assistance. "She was so caring and professional, offering to help with tasks that had become difficult for me," Margaret explained. "But after she started bringing my meals and medications, I felt weak and confused most of the time. My own daughter didn't recognize my personality changes." The financial evidence presented by FBI agents and forensic accountants created an undeniable picture of sophisticated fraud spanning multiple years and dozens of victims. Agent Morrison walked the jury through bank records, forged documents, and money laundering schemes that had allowed Amanda and Marcus to steal over $2 million from elderly victims. The defendants created an elaborate system for identifying targets, gaining access to their assets, and eliminating witnesses who might expose their crimes. She testified. "This wasn't opportunistic theft. This was systematic predation, requiring extensive planning and coordination." The prosecution's most dramatic moment came when they played security footage from the nursing facility showing Amanda administering unauthorized medications to my grandmother during her final weeks. The video clearly showed Amanda entering Grandma's room with small containers and syringes, injecting substances into her IV line while the nursing staff was distracted with other patients. "What you're seeing is Amanda Whitmore murdering her own grandmother," Prosecutor Martinez told the jury. She poisoned Eleanor Whitmore slowly over several weeks, stealing from her accounts while gradually killing her with medication overdoses. My testimony as the prosecution's final witness focused on Amanda's history of violence and her assault when I discovered evidence of her theft. Amanda grabbed my shoulders with enough force to leave fingerprint bruises and threw me down 15 wooden steps. I explained, my voice growing stronger as I described the attack. She told me I didn't understand her financial obligations and that keeping quiet was what our family had always done. Defense cross-examination attempted to discredit my account by suggesting head injury had affected my memory and that childhood sibling conflicts were being exaggerated into false abuse allegations. "Isn't it true that you've always been jealous of your sister's success?" Amanda's attorney asked aggressively. "No, I've always been afraid of my sister's violence." "Isn't it possible that your fall down the stairs was accidental and that your injuries have caused false memories about being pushed?" "The medical evidence proves I was grabbed and thrown. Multiple doctors have confirmed that my injuries weren't consistent with an accidental fall." The defense's case collapsed when they called Amanda to testify on her own behalf. Under cross-examination, she became defensive and angry, revealing the calculating personality she had hidden behind her caring facade. "I helped those elderly people manage their finances when their families couldn't be bothered," she insisted. "If they died naturally while I was assisting them, that's unfortunate, but not criminal." "Did you research medication interactions that could cause cardiac events in elderly patients?" "I researched all aspects of elder care to provide better service." "Did you document optimal dosages for causing confusion without immediate death?" Amanda's composure finally cracked. "Those people were dying anyway. I just made their final months more comfortable while ensuring their assets were properly managed." Her admission that she had deliberately hastened elderly victims' deaths destroyed any remaining credibility with the jury. Closing arguments lasted 2 full days, with prosecutors summarizing the overwhelming evidence of Amanda's systematic crimes, and defense attorneys making desperate attempts to portray her as mentally ill rather than criminally responsible. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges: 4 counts of murder in the first degree, multiple counts of elder abuse and financial exploitation, conspiracy, and attempted murder for my assault. Marcus was convicted on related charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy, though he escaped the murder convictions by successfully arguing that Amanda had concealed the poisoning aspects of their scheme from him. Judge Hamilton scheduled sentencing for the following month, but everyone in the courtroom knew that Amanda would spend the rest of her life in prison for her crimes. As the bailiff led Amanda away in shackles, she turned to look directly at me with pure hatred in her eyes. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her anger or threats. Justice had finally been served, and Amanda would never again have the opportunity to hurt vulnerable people or intimidate family members into silence. The sentencing hearing took place 6 weeks later, in a packed courtroom filled with victims' families, media representatives, and community members who had followed the trial with intense interest. Judge Hamilton had received dozens of victim impact statements and character references that would influence Amanda's final punishment. This case represents one of the most calculated and heartless series of crimes I have encountered in 23 years on the bench. Judge Hamilton began. The defendant systematically targeted vulnerable elderly victims, gained their trust, and murdered them for financial gain, while causing immeasurable suffering to families and communities. Amanda sat rigidly in her orange prison jumpsuit, flanked by her defense attorneys, who had requested leniency based on claims of mental illness and childhood trauma. But her cold demeanor during the proceedings contradicted any suggestion that she was remorseful or mentally impaired. The prosecution had requested life sentences for each murder conviction to run consecutively, rather than concurrently ensuring that Amanda would never be eligible for parole or early release. The people of Ohio demand justice for Eleanor Whitmore, Frank Patterson, Margaret Davis, and Joseph Chen. Prosecutor Michael Chen argued, "These victims trusted the defendant with their financial security and paid for that trust with their lives." Victim impact statements provided the most emotionally powerful moments of the hearing. Michelle Patterson spoke about her mother Eleanor's final months and the devastating impact of learning that her confusion and fear were caused by deliberate poisoning. "Amanda Whitmore stole more than my mother's money," Michelle testified through tears. "She stole her dignity, her peace of mind, and her ability to die naturally surrounded by love rather than manipulation and fear." Frank Wilson, now recovered from Amanda's poisoning, spoke about the lasting trauma of realizing how close he had come to becoming another murder victim. "I trusted her completely because she seemed so caring and professional," he said. "Learning that her kindness was calculated deception designed to kill me has destroyed my ability to trust anyone. I live in fear that other predators are watching and waiting for opportunities to exploit my vulnerabilities." My own victim impact statement focused on the lifetime of abuse Amanda had inflicted and the courage required to finally pursue criminal charges despite family pressure to remain silent. "Amanda's violence shaped every aspect of my childhood and adult life," I told the court. "She taught me to expect pain, to accept blame for her actions, and to prioritize family reputation over personal safety. Breaking free from that cycle of abuse required more strength than I knew I possessed. But seeing justice served and knowing that Amanda can never again hurt vulnerable people has given me hope that survivors can overcome even the most systematic abuse when they have support and refuse to remain silent." The defense presented character witnesses who testified about Amanda's professional achievements and community volunteer work, attempting to portray her crimes as aberrant behavior inconsistent with her true personality. But Judge Hamilton dismissed these efforts with obvious skepticism. The defendant's ability to maintain a public facade of caring professionalism while systematically murdering elderly victims demonstrates sophisticated deception skills that make her extremely dangerous to society. Marcus Reed received a separate sentence of 25 years in prison for his role in the financial fraud conspiracy, though his cooperation with investigators and lack of direct involvement in the murders resulted in more lenient punishment. Mr. Reed enabled and profited from crimes against elderly victims, but the evidence shows that Ms. Whitmore was the primary architect of the murder scheme, Judge Hamilton explained. Amanda's final sentence exceeded even the prosecution's requests, 4 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole plus additional terms for financial crimes, and my assault totaling over 200 years in prison. "The defendant will die in prison," Judge Hamilton announced. "This sentence reflects the court's determination that someone capable of such calculated cruelty must never again have the opportunity to harm innocent people." Amanda showed no emotion as the sentence was read, maintaining the cold detachment she had displayed throughout the trial. But I felt overwhelming relief knowing that her capacity for violence had finally been permanently contained. The financial restitution portion of the proceedings brought unexpected positive outcomes for victims' families. Asset forfeiture from Amanda and Marcus's illegal activities, combined with insurance settlements and bank penalties, created a fund exceeding $3 million to compensate victims and their survivors. The court orders full restitution to all verified victims, Judge Hamilton ruled. While money cannot repair the emotional damage caused by these crimes, it may help families rebuild their financial security and access needed counseling services. My inheritance from Grandma's estate was fully restored, including the House Lake cabin and all personal property that Amanda had attempted to steal. The settlement also included compensation for medical expenses and lost income resulting from my assault and the investigation process. More importantly, I received validation that my decision to pursue criminal charges had been correct, despite family opposition and social pressure to handle the situation privately. 6 months after sentencing, I moved to Portland, Oregon, using my restored inheritance to start fresh in a city where no one knew about my family's criminal history or the decades of abuse I had survived. I enrolled in graduate school to study social work focusing on elder abuse prevention and domestic violence intervention. My personal experience with Amanda's crimes provided insights that enhanced my academic understanding and motivated my commitment to helping other victims. The nonprofit organization I established, Eleanor's Voice, provided advocacy services for elder abuse survivors and trained bank employees to recognize signs of financial exploitation. Named in honor of my grandmother, the organization grew rapidly as communities recognized the need for better protection of vulnerable elderly residents. Elder abuse is often invisible because victims are isolated and perpetrators appear trustworthy. I explained during a conference presentation about Amanda's case. Financial institutions, healthcare providers, and family members must learn to recognize warning signs and take action to protect vulnerable individuals. My therapy sessions helped me process the trauma of Amanda's abuse and develop healthy relationships based on trust rather than fear. Learning to distinguish between normal conflict and predatory behavior required extensive work, but gradually I began forming friendships without constantly expecting betrayal or violence. The most healing aspect of my recovery was connecting with other survivors who had overcome systematic abuse and built meaningful lives despite their traumatic histories. Support groups and survivor networks provided the encouragement and understanding that I had never received from my family of origin. My parents eventually moved to Arizona, selling their house to pay legal expenses and distancing themselves from the community scrutiny that followed Amanda's conviction. We maintained minimal contact through holiday cards and occasional phone calls, but the relationship never recovered from their betrayal during the investigation. Some family relationships cannot survive the truth, my therapist explained. Choosing health over loyalty is difficult, but it's necessary when family members consistently prioritize their comfort over your safety. 2 years after Amanda's conviction, I testified before the Ohio legislature about needed reforms to protect elderly banking customers and improve oversight of professional caregivers who work with vulnerable populations. Amanda's crimes were preventable if proper safeguards had existed, I told the banking committee. Financial institutions must implement monitoring systems to detect unusual account activity and provide training to help employees recognize exploitation. The legislation that resulted from my advocacy, known as Eleanor's Law, required enhanced background checks for bank employees with access to elderly customers' accounts and established protocols for reporting suspected financial abuse to authorities. Watching the bill become law felt like the completion of my grandmother's mission to protect other vulnerable people from predators like Amanda. 5 years after the trial, I married David Chen, a social worker I met during graduate school, who understood the importance of my advocacy work and supported my commitment to helping other survivors. Our wedding took place at the lake cabin I had inherited from Grandma, surrounded by friends from the survivor community and colleagues from Eleanor's Voice. The celebration felt like a triumph over Amanda's attempts to destroy my capacity for trust and love. Standing on the dock where Grandma had taught me to fish as a child, I realized that survival wasn't enough. True healing required transforming pain into purpose and using personal experience to create positive change for others. Amanda remained in maximum security prison, serving her sentence with no possibility of release. Occasionally, I received updates about her appeals and legal challenges, all of which were unsuccessful. But mostly I focused on building a life defined by healing rather than harm, by advocacy rather than silence, and by hope rather than fear. My grandmother's final gift wasn't just the inheritance that allowed me to rebuild my life. It was her example of courage in documenting Amanda's crimes despite her physical weakness and her trust that I would eventually find the strength to pursue justice. 7 years after Amanda's conviction, I stood before an audience of 300 advocate survivors and professionals at the National Conference on Elder Abuse Prevention, delivering the keynote address about transforming trauma into social change. The auditorium in Denver was filled with people who had dedicated their careers to protecting vulnerable adults from exploitation and abuse. Many were survivors themselves, individuals who had overcome systematic victimization and chosen to help others navigate similar challenges. When I discovered my sister stealing from our dying grandmother, I thought I was dealing with simple family greed. I began. I had no idea that confronting her would expose a serial murder scheme targeting elderly victims throughout central Ohio. The audience listened with rapt attention as I described Amanda's methods and the sophisticated criminal enterprise she had operated through her position at the bank. But my focus was on the transformation process that had allowed me to move from victim to advocate. Survival requires more than escaping abuse, I explained. True healing happens when we use our experience to prevent others from suffering similar harm. Eleanor's voice had grown into a national organization with chapters in 15 states, providing advocacy services for elder abuse survivors and training programs for financial institutions, healthcare providers, and law enforcement agencies. Our most successful program, the Trusted Professional Initiative, educated bank employees, attorneys, and caregivers about recognizing warning signs of financial exploitation and responding appropriately when they suspected abuse. Amanda's crimes were possible because institutions failed to protect vulnerable customers. I continued. Every profession that serves elderly clients has a responsibility to implement safeguards and train staff to identify exploitation. The conference presentation included case studies from recent investigations that had been successful because trained professionals recognized suspicious patterns and reported them to authorities before victims were seriously harmed. In the 3 years since implementing enhanced training protocols based on Amanda's case, participating banks had identified and prevented over 200 cases of suspected financial exploitation, protecting millions of dollars in assets and potentially saving lives. Early intervention is crucial, I emphasized. Once predators establish control over their victims through manipulation or medication, reversing the exploitation becomes much more difficult. After my presentation, I was approached by Maria Santos, whose elderly mother had been targeted by a financial predator, similar to Amanda. Maria's quick recognition of warning signs and decisive action had prevented her mother's exploitation and led to the perpetrator's arrest. Your advocacy work gave me the knowledge and courage to challenge someone I initially trusted, Maria told me. Without understanding the patterns you've identified, I might have dismissed my suspicions as family overreaction. These interactions reminded me why I had chosen to build my career around elder abuse prevention, despite the emotional difficulty of constantly confronting issues related to my own trauma history. My marriage to David had provided the stable foundation necessary for intensive advocacy work. He understood that helping other survivors was essential to my healing process and supported my decision to share our story publicly despite the ongoing media attention. "Some people think you should move on and stop talking about Amanda," he said during one of our evening walks around the Portland neighborhood where we had bought a house near the river. "But I've seen how your advocacy work has helped you process the trauma and create meaning from terrible experiences." We had decided against having children, choosing instead to focus our energy on mentoring young advocates and supporting survivors who were building new lives after escaping abusive situations. Our guest room frequently housed women transitioning from domestic violence shelters or elderly individuals who needed temporary housing while recovering from financial exploitation. Every person we help is someone Amanda can't hurt, I reflected. That feels like the most meaningful legacy I can create from her crimes. The 5th anniversary of Amanda's sentencing had prompted renewed media coverage and documentary interest in the case. Producers from several networks had approached me about participating in true crime programs focused on her systematic predation. I declined most requests, preferring to focus on educational content rather than entertainment that might sensationalize Amanda's crimes or exploit her victims' suffering. But I did collaborate with journalist Sarah Kim on a book about elder abuse prevention that used Amanda's case as a framework for discussing broader systemic issues that enabled financial predators. The goal isn't to create more fear about trusting professional caregivers, I explained during our final interview. It's to educate families and institutions about implementing reasonable safeguards that protect vulnerable people without destroying their independence. The book titled Trust and Betrayal: How Financial Predators Target Elderly Victims became a resource for training programs and policy development initiatives across the country. More personally meaningful was the scholarship fund I had established at Ohio State University for students studying social work with focus on elder advocacy. The Eleanor Whitmore Memorial Scholarship provided financial assistance for individuals who demonstrated commitment to protecting vulnerable adults and preventing abuse. Each year I met with scholarship recipients to discuss their career goals and provide mentorship about navigating the challenging field of adult protective services. Your grandmother's courage in documenting Amanda's crimes saved countless lives. I told this year's scholarship winner, a young woman whose own grandfather had been exploited by a caregiver. The best way to honor her memory is ensuring that future advocates have the resources and support needed to protect vulnerable people. 10 years after my assault, I returned to Columbus for the dedication of a memorial garden, honoring Amanda's victims at the Senior Center, where she had volunteered during her criminal activities. The ceremony was attended by victims' families, survivors of her exploitation attempts, and community members who had been affected by her crimes. Eleanor Whitmore, Frank Patterson, Margaret Davis, and Joseph Chen died because someone they trusted betrayed that faith for money. I said during the dedication speech, "This garden ensures their memory lives on and reminds us all of our responsibility to protect vulnerable community members." The memorial included benches where visitors could sit quietly and reflect, surrounded by flowers that bloomed throughout the growing season. A small plaque quoted my grandmother's favorite saying, "Kindness matters most when it's hardest to give." After the ceremony, I visited my grandmother's grave for the first time since her funeral. Her headstone had been replaced with a larger memorial that acknowledged her role in exposing Amanda's crimes and protecting future victims. "Thank you for giving me the courage to fight back," I whispered, placing fresh flowers beside the stone. "Your example taught me that love sometimes requires difficult choices and that protecting others is worth any personal cost." Standing in the cemetery where my grandmother rested, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting the trauma or eliminating its impact on my life. It was about transforming pain into purpose, using experience to create positive change, and building relationships based on genuine trust rather than fear. Amanda remained in prison serving her sentence without possibility of parole. I no longer followed news about her appeals or medical condition, having learned that obsessing about her punishment interfered with my own growth and healing. Justice was served. David reminded me when I occasionally wondered about Amanda's current situation. "Your job now is living fully and helping others do the same." My current project involved developing training curriculum for medical professionals to help them recognize signs of medication tampering and elder abuse in clinical settings. Healthcare providers often have the most intimate access to elderly patients, I explained to the development team. Teaching them to identify suspicious patterns could prevent many cases of systematic poisoning like what Amanda inflicted on her victims. The curriculum would be piloted in nursing schools and medical residency programs, with plans for national implementation if initial results showed improved recognition and reporting of suspected abuse. As I concluded my conference presentation and accepted questions from the audience, I felt deep gratitude for the journey that had brought me from victim to advocate, from silence to voice, from isolation to community. The most important lesson I've learned is that survivors have unique insights that can protect others from similar harm. I told the final questioner, "Our experiences, however painful, become powerful tools for creating positive change when we find the courage to share them." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just recognition of my advocacy work, it was acknowledgement of every survivor who had chosen healing over hatred, purpose over bitterness, and hope over despair. Walking off the stage, I thought about my grandmother's belief that even the most difficult experiences could be transformed into opportunities to help others. Her faith in my strength had sustained me through the darkest period of my life and guided me toward a future defined by service rather than suffering. Amanda's attempt to destroy me had ultimately led to discovering my own capacity for resilience, advocacy, and love. Her crimes had caused immeasurable harm, but they had also revealed the power of truth-telling, community support, and choosing justice over family loyalty. That transformation felt like the most meaningful victory possible, not just surviving Amanda's abuse, but using that survival to protect others from similar harm and build a life filled with purpose, connection, and hope. What would you do if you discovered that someone you trusted was systematically harming vulnerable people in your community? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and please share this with someone who might need to hear that speaking up for victims is always the right choice, even when it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. Thank you for listening to this story, and remember that your voice matters when it comes to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Until next time, keep standing up for what's right, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted to keep.